So yeah, welcome everyone to this insight session where we're going to be talking about how occupational therapists can comply with the HCPC Standard 5, which is the standard for proficiency, culture, equity, and diversity. It's going to be mostly Rachel Booth-Gardner presenting with a little bit of help from myself. So I think just to give an introduction to as to how we Oh, um, I know you can't see me because I'm sharing my screen, so I apologize for that. But it's just going to be quick. Then I'll hand over to Rachel. So yeah, so as a way of introducing this, last year was it 2023? I think HCPC updated their standards, and in some of the meetings that we've had with them, we talked about maybe providing a guide because the standard is, it just says what occupational therapists are expected to do, and there's maybe about 7 bullet points. So we were asking them, can you elaborate a little bit more so people can really understand what this means in practice? And they say they were not going to do that for all the professions. So we took it upon ourselves to actually, develop that guide that kind of like goes into those 7 bullet points and explain what they actually mean, like what's expected. For example, when you're thinking of the legislation of the legal requirements, which laws are you supposed to look at? Because the standard just says you should understand equality legislation in the UK, but some people might not know what is that legislation. So what we have done, me and Rachel and others, we worked with some of our expert advisory groups as well, is to produce a resource which we're going to introduce today. So today is just introducing what's going to come in the actual guide. And the actual guide is going to be published, we are hoping, this month on the communities platform to start with. And then we're looking at probably publishing different copies or different, in different formats. We haven't really agreed yet how that's going to come about, but I think there's going to be hopefully maybe a printed format, and we're looking at shorter versions as well, so that if you want to learn about a certain topic and you don't want to read the whole document, you can just engage with that. So we're looking at shorter learning modules as well that we're going to develop to come with the guide. So I will hand over to Rachel, who is going to kind of walk us through what's in the guide, and over to you, Rachel.
Thank you so much, Sav. So hello, everybody. And it's always weird, isn't it? Because you can't actually see everybody. So I feel like I'm just talking to myself, but here we go. And I won't be able to follow the chat as we go, but we are going to have a bit of an interactive section a bit later on. So I'll be able to look a little bit more then. So just to introduce myself. So I'm Rachel Booth-Gardner. And as my mum would say, I wear many hats in the profession. So my day job, I'm a lead occupational therapist for a mental health and learning disabilities NHS trust here in the northeast of England. But I'm also a founding member of Able OT UK, which is a support and network advocacy group for occupational therapy staff and students with lived experiences of disabilities, long-term health conditions, and/or neurodiversity. In addition, I facilitate O-Talk, which is a discussion about occupational therapy that started on Twitter, but as of yesterday has moved to the Royal College of OT's Communities platform. I'm also a network lead for RCOT's Northern and Yorkshire Regional Network. I'm a public governor for an NHS trust here in Middlesbrough, and I am a disability rep for my local Unison branch. I would describe myself as an activist. I have lived experience of cerebral palsy, dyslexia and long COVID, and since 2021 I began to use a wheelchair. And I've written a blog about my experiences as an occupational therapist and my lived experiences since 2013. Sav, if you move us on to the next slide. So the purpose of today's session is to introduce you to this new guide that will be published very soon, that looks at the HCPC, or the Healthcare Professions Standards of Proficiency for Occupational Therapists. And today we're going to look at some of the sections within the guide that will hopefully help you explore the impact of values, beliefs and assumptions on practice, equality legislation and our responsibilities, barriers to access and inclusion and occupational justice, and the implication and putting in reasonable adjustments. And hopefully at the end, we're going to have a little bit of an interactive scenario, so I'd really encourage you to join in. So Sav's put a picture up of what the guide is going to look like. And as he said, well, hopefully it's going to be available on the community's platform for you to be able to interact and look at and crucially, give us your feedback. So what's changed? In 2023, the Healthcare Professions Council updated their standards of proficiency for occupational therapists. One of the biggest changes was around how culture, equality and equity and diversity in practice. The standard now requires us as registrants to recognise the impact of culture, equality and diversity on practice, and practice in a non-discriminatory and inclusive manner. This means that equality and inclusion is not just good practice, they are now a clear professional requirement. Next slide, please, Sav. So the purpose of this guide, as Sav's already said, is hopefully that you'll be able to use it in your own supervision, on a one-to-one, in monitoring, in mentoring, or in community continuing professional development activities. We want you to think of it as a tool for reflection, conversation and action. And more importantly, we want it to be a live document that's continuously shaped by members' insights, examples and feedback. So next slide, please, Sav. So the guide as it stands has 5 parts to it. And during this presentation, I'm going to briefly go through some of the things that it covers. So we'll just move straight on to the next slide. So the first part is about purpose and foundations. And I'm now going to briefly go through some of these sections and why they're important to us as occupational therapists. But once the guide's published, you'll be able to look at it in a lot more detail and be able to have these discussions within your workplaces. So if we can move on to the next slide. So language. The language we use always evolves. So let's take a minute to think about it. The Healthcare Professions Council refers to this area with the term equality, diversity and inclusion, which is the standard wording that you'll see in their documents. However, the Royal College of Occupational Therapists have chosen to adopt the term equity, diversity and belonging. This wording was adopted because it better reflects occupational therapy practice. And it is the focus of RCOT's 2024 to 2027 Equity, Diversity and Belonging Strategy. We say equity rather than equality because it means recognising systemic inequalities and removing barriers so that people can achieve fair outcomes. Diversity means acknowledging differences in identities and experiences and making sure all voices are heard. And belonging goes beyond inclusion. It's about creating a space where people feel safe, valued, and able to be themselves. Because inclusion is about inviting somebody to the table, but belonging is about them feeling welcome and knowing that they truly belong. So, language. Language is never neutral, is it? It shapes how we feel, our relationships, and our sense of equity. Using inclusive language is a really practical step towards creating equity and belonging. With this guide, we are pushing further how we understand the language we use and how we make sure that it's inclusive. For example, in this guide, we use the term people instead of the term service user. The term people reflects partnership, dignity, and mutual respect. And it reminds us that those that we work with are not defined by the services that they're accessing, but by the people that they are. everyone has the right to feel heard and respected. Formation in practice is about actively validating people's identities, experiences, and needs. It's more than just avoiding discrimination. It's about building trust and creating a sense of belonging. In practice, this means things like using people's chosen names, pronouns, recognizing and celebrating cultural and personal identities, and making sure dignity and partnerships are upheld in every single interaction. Next slide, please, Seth. So, what are the standards that we're talking about? The overall requirement is that registrants must recognise the importance of culture, equality and diversity on practice, and practice in a non-discriminatory and inclusive manner. To help us understand this and what it really means, the standard has been broken down into 7 sections. And I'm going to read them out because I think they're really important. 5.1, respond appropriately to the needs of all groups and individuals in practice, recognising that this can be affected by difference of any kind, including but not limited to protected characteristics, intersectional experiences, and cultural differences. 5.2, understand equality legislation and apply it to their practice. 5.3, recognise the potential impact of their own values, beliefs, and personal bias, which may be unconscious, on practice, and take personal action to ensure all service users and carers are treated appropriately with respect and dignity. 5.4, understand the duty of making reasonable adjustments in practice and be able to make and support reasonable adjustments in their and others' practice. 5.5, recognise the characteristics and consequences of barriers to inclusion, including for socially isolated groups. 5.6, actively challenge barriers, support the implementation of change wherever possible. 5.7, recognise that regard to equality, diversity, and inclusion needs to be embedded in all applications of all HCPC standards across all areas of practice. In the guide the Royal College has produced, we explore each of these sections in more detail for every part, and in every part there's a reflection exercise that you can work through. They're designed to help you think about how you're currently meeting the standards and how you might have gaps and what gaps you might have in your knowledge and practice. So part 2, so we stick with part 2, go. Yeah, perfect. So part 2 of the guide explores legal and ethical responsibilities. And these are some of the things that it covers. If we go on to the next slide, Sav. So the Equality Act. So the Equality Act is the main anti-discriminatory law in England, Scotland and Wales. It applies only in England, Scotland and Wales, and in Northern Ireland there are similar protections exist through separate pieces of equality and anti-discriminatory legislation. The Equality Act protects people from unfair treatment and promotes a more equal society. Occupational therapists must apply this in practice to ensure inclusive, right-based care. And within the Act, there are 9 protected characteristics, and they're listed there: age, disability, gender reassignment, marriage and civil partnership, pregnancy and maternity, race, religion or belief, sex and sexual orientation. Next slide, please, Sav. But there are also lots of other laws that we need to take into consideration. Most of these apply in England, Scotland and Wales. And again, in Northern Ireland, there are different laws that cover the same things. I don't have time to go into all of them in detail, but some of them that may apply are the Mental Capacity Act, the Mental Health Act, the Care Act, the Human Rights Act, DOLS, and Liberty Protection Safeguards, and of course the Children's Act. I would encourage you all to go and have a little bit more of a look at some of those acts and what they are. So, reasonable adjustments. Actually, if you move on to the next one, Sav, because I think we agreed with that's it, and then we'll go back to that one. Okay. So, incorporating recent case law, and this can be quite difficult. So, equality law is not fixed, and the cases on this slide show us how different people might bring case laws against organisations, and this may change the definitions. So these two cases affect how beliefs, sex, and gender identity are understood legally. For us as occupational therapists, this means respecting affirmed identities whilst negotiating legal frameworks, offering inclusive options, and making reasonable adjustments. It links directly to our work on equality, diversity, and belonging, and to occupation itself, since gender identity influences self, roles, routines, and participation. So the first case was a person called Maya Forcier, I think is how you pronounce her name. She was a researcher who lost her contract through expressing a belief that sex is unchangeable. Initially, the tribunal decided that her views were not worthy of protection. On appeal, the court ruled that her beliefs are protected under the Equality Act of 2010 as a belief. But the judge also made it clear that this protection is not a license to misgender people or create unsafe and hostile environments. Beliefs are protected, but they are not an excuse. And we still need to uphold people's dignities and rights. The second case was more recent, and this was For Women Scotland versus Scottish ministers, and it was decided earlier this year. The case challenged Scottish Government's guidance on how they'd broadened the legal definition of woman. The Scottish Government wanted to say that the legal definition of woman included trans women with a gender reassignment certificate. The court in session ruled that under the Equality Act, the words man and woman mean biological sex. This ruling is binding in Scotland only. Elsewhere in the UK, it does not automatically apply, but it may influence how courts in England and Wales approach similar issues. It also has practical implications on how single-sex spaces, such as wards and prisons, may be managed. But I think it's really worth saying here that it's had a huge impact on the trans and non-binary communities. We must always ensure that everyone we work with feels respected. Together, these two cases demonstrate the balance that courts are trying to strike. It broadens the range of protected beliefs and clarifies the legal meaning of sex in some contexts. At the same time, we're reminded that equality law is not about choosing one group over another, but about balancing fair rights. Above all, in practice, respect for affirmed identities and inclusion is essential for creating safe, enabling environments. Next slide, please, Sav. Oh, so if we jump back up, yeah, reasonable adjustments, brilliant. So, for me, this is one of the most important distinctions for us to think about. Reasonable adjustments have been around since the Disability Discrimination Act of 1995, which was replaced by the Equality Act of 2010. Reasonable adjustments are a legal obligation for organisations. They're not an optional extra. Their purpose is to remove barriers so people can access services, education and employment on an equal basis. Clinical interventions, on the other hand, are part of our therapeutic practice as occupational therapists. They are how we use our skills to support people with occupational performance. The difficulty and also the opportunity lies in recognising the difference. It is easy for services to blur the two, to expect people to work harder through therapy instead of making environments and systems more accessible. That's why it's really worth spending time reflecting on this distinction. It reminds us that reasonable adjustments are about removing systemic barriers, while clinical interventions are about supporting a person's occupational needs. Next slide, please, Shab. So, conflicting beliefs and values. This section of the guide is about the real tensions that can arise when our personal, cultural, or religious beliefs intersect with our professional duties to provide inclusive care. As occupational therapists, we all bring our own values, backgrounds to practice, and sometimes these may not fully align with the needs of the individuals or the identities of the people that we're working with. The point is that whilst beliefs are respected, they can never be used as a reason to discriminate or deny somebody safe, dignified, and inclusive care. Our responsibility is to set clear boundaries, prioritise safety, and uphold people's rights. When situations feel difficult, it's important to use reflection and supervision to escalate and report any concerns. This isn't about avoiding people's values, but ensuring personal standards and legal duties come first. Next slide, please. So part 3 of the guide is about practical applications and accountability. And again, I'm now briefly going to go through some of the things that the guide talks about. So if we move on to the next slide. So meeting HCPC Standard 5 requires more than compliance with law and policy. These 3 core components help us understand our duty in more detail. Anti-oppressive practice, actively challenging discrimination, power imbalances, and structural barriers that limit participation. Cultural humanity, approaching each person with openness, self-reflection and respect, and recognising we're always learning from others' experiences. And for me, one of the most interesting things, intersectionality, understanding our overlapping identities. For example, how our race, our disability, our gender, our class, all combine to shape our experiences of inequality or of privilege. These concepts ensure that occupational therapists are not just legally compliant, but responsive and person-centred. Next slide, please, Sav. So, reflection. We all know that reflection is central to our practice as occupational therapists. Reflections help us recognise how our personal values, beliefs and assumptions may influence our decisions. It also helps us prevent discrimination and exclusion. But the question is, how much do we really explore our bias? There are lots of types of biases. We've got conscious or explicit bias. These are deliberate prejudices we may hold. Or unconscious biases. These are hidden assumptions shaped by our culture and experiences that we may not even notice in ourselves. Let's break some of these down. We've got age bias, assuming an older person can't learn new skills. Gender bias, thinking that caregiving is women's work. Disability bias, underestimating or overestimating a person's capacity because of their disability. Cultural bias, upholding Western ideas of independence over other ways of living. Confirmation bias, only interpreting somebody through their diagnosis rather than seeing them as a whole person. And affirmation bias, favouring people that look like us. Connected to bias is microaggressions. These are everyday words, behaviours, and actions that may seem small to the person saying them, but they have a real impact on the person receiving them. They often come from assumptions, stereotypes, or thoughtless comments that build up over time. For example, misgendering, using the wrong pronouns or name even after being corrected, communicates that somebody's identity is not respected. Stereotypes, assuming women may prioritise family over career, or that a disabled colleague can't handle responsibility. Dismissing voices, talking over colleagues in meetings, ignoring their contributions, or crediting their ideas to someone else. Although the word micro suggests something minor, the impact is never minor. And repeated exposure can harm confidence, belonging, and participation. In workplaces and healthcare settings, microaggressions undermine inclusion and create barriers to equity. As occupational therapists, it's important that we notice and challenge microaggressions because they directly affect people's ability to engage in meaningful occupations and to feel respected in the environments where they work, live, and receive care. Finally, it's not enough just to reflect. We need to put reflections into action. We can use tools like journaling, bias checks, supervision, and feedback. And we can ask ourselves reflective questions, such as, when did the last time I recognised bias in myself? And what did I do about it? Next slide, please. Supporting students and colleagues. Equity, diversity, and belonging isn't just about supporting the people that access occupational therapy. It also applies to the teams we work in and the students we support. When we create inclusive environments, we give colleagues and students the opportunity to thrive, to lead, and to contribute to their lives fully. We also need to acknowledge, sorry, I'm going to take a drink because I've not had a drink for a while and my mouth's gone dry. We also need to acknowledge marginalisation. Exclusion can arise in many ways through racism, ableism, LGBTQ+A discrimination, accent bias, classism, and religious discrimination. We all have a responsibility to validate those concerns and act at a systemic level and support cultural change in the workplace. And I'll end with a reflective question for us all. Do you create an environment where colleagues and students feel safe to be themselves? And what action do you take when barriers arise? Next slide, please, Sav. So, building inclusive services and teams. This section is about recognising that equity, diversity, and belonging cannot rest on the shoulders of individuals alone. Inclusion has to be embedded in all levels of services and teams. Without structures and cultures that support it, inclusive practice becomes inconsistent and dependent on individuals' goodwill. For services, this means revising policies, checking bias, conducting access audit reports, identifying barriers, and using data to understand who is being reached and who isn't. Co-production with people with lived experiences is crucial because they can tell us directly what's working and what isn't. For teams, leadership plays a crucial role. Leaders must model anti-oppressive practice, ensure training goes beyond awareness to action, and create environments where people feel psychologically safe to speak up. Mentorship is a powerful way to support underrepresented staff to progress, and inclusive recruitment practice helps ensure leadership reflects the diversity of the workforce. The reflection questions in this section help us turn a spotlight on ourselves. What are we personally doing to build inclusion in our teams and services? And how do we measure whether what we are making, whether we're making a genuine difference rather than it just being a tick box exercise? Next slide, please, Sav. So that was a whistle-stop tour of some of the sections that we'll cover. The fourth section is the real practical element. So within the guide, it focuses on all 7 points of the standard 5 of the HCPC, standards of proficiency. And there are 3 examples for you to explore practically with reflective questions to guide your thinking and discussion. These are not exhausted. They're a starting point. And we really encourage you to use your own examples and to give us feedback on the types of things that reflect your practice. Next slide, please, Sav. So unfortunately, we don't have time to look through every single point in section 4. But what I have done is I've picked out 3 examples of the guide that we're going to explore and hopefully use the chat feature for us. And I'll need your assistance here, Sav, to see what people have written and think about it. So I'm going to move on to the next slide and I'm going to read the scenario. And whilst I'm reading the scenario, I want you to have a think about these 3 questions. And if you could write some of your thoughts in the chat, that would be great. So this scenario is a man in his 30s who recently arrived in the UK as a refugee following conflict and displacement. Recovering from an injury and living in temporary accommodation, he speaks little English. No interpreter was provided for his initial assessment. Asked to perform tasks such as preparing food or managing medication, he appears anxious, avoids eye contact, and gives minimal responses. Initially, this is interpreted as a low functioning ability. So when we think about this scenario, what would affirmation in practice look like in this case? What laws and rights apply here? And most importantly, what should the occupational therapist do next? So at this point, I'm going to have a little bit of a look in the chat. I haven't read anything, Sav, so I don't know what people have been saying.
Yeah, I can't actually see the chat because I'm presenting my screen. So maybe Ketan, are you able to see the chat?
I've just opened it up. So
okay, so we've got a couple. So there's one that says write to an interpreter.
Yeah, absolutely.
The page will write to an interpreter. Sorry, the thing's moving really fast.
Yeah.
For communication, book an interpreter, get a translator, and rebook the assessment. Fiona's asking the question, why wasn't there an interpreter in the first place?
Absolutely.
Ensure that interpreter is available. Support with language communication needs addressing. tasks they are being asked to do may be unfamiliar.
That's a really
Yeah.
good there, Kat, and I think that was one of the points that I wanted to make. Absolutely, we're making I think particularly in occupational therapy, we make some assumptions around, right, we're going to go in and we're going to do some interventions about looking at somebody's independence, but particularly for a male refugee, they may never have cooked a meal. So what assumptions are we making there around
Absolutely.
this person, where this person's cultural background
Absolutely.
comes from?
Karen's
And
saying Karen's saying I wouldn't do an assessment without an interpreter,
absolutely, yeah.
an advocate, interpreter. So interpreter is, everybody's saying interpreter as a first. Yeah.
That's brilliant. And that's ultimately what we want people to reflect on. This assessment should have never gone ahead without an interpreter. That's really important. And we really need to be thinking about what are our values.
Yeah,
as a
Victoria,
Go on.
sorry, yeah, so Victoria is also saying that maybe have a trauma-informed approach
Yeah, perfect.
and to recognize stressful events, that cooking food that is culturally appropriate.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, that's great. Thank you. Everybody's doing excellent. What about, has anybody said anything about the laws that may come into play here? So the Equality Act comes into play because this person has a number of protected characteristics. The Human Rights Law comes into play here, and potentially the Mental Capacity Act and the Care Act may come into play. So these are all bits of legislation that are really, really important for us to think about and reflect on.
Yeah, so Joanna's mentioned the Care Act.
Great, perfect. Well, what we'll do is we'll move on to the next scenario. Let me find my note. We're doing really well for timing here. So scenario 2. So Sav, do you want to share the slide? Because I don't think it's sharing scenario 2 slide, are you?
I am.
It
Unless
is,
something
it's
has
there.
happened.
Yeah.
All right, okay, I just can't see it. That's fine. Okay, so scenario 2. A young adult who identifies as non-binary is accessing occupational therapy for fatigue management. The therapist, without deliberate reflection, uses gendered language such as she and young woman in conversation and, importantly, in the documentation. Over time, the person disengages and begins cancelling appointments. So again, let's think about what would affirmation practice look like in this case? What laws and rights apply here? And what should the occupational therapist do next? So let's have a little bit of a look in the chat. Absolutely, use appropriate pronouns. Really important. And also in documentation, I've worked with someone who really struggled actually with remembering how to use, which pronouns to use. But one of the things that we talked about in supervision quite a lot was that he was managing to do it when he was working with the person, but in the documentation wasn't. And that's really hard actually, because if you are used to writing he and she all of the time, then it does take a bit of practice to go back and reflect and look at what you're writing in your documentation and making sure that you're using the right pronouns throughout. People have got laws, yeah, equality law comes into account. It goes really fast, the chat, doesn't it? So, and what should the therapist be doing next? If this person's disengaged, why have they disengaged? Is it that we're not understanding them, we're not being respectful to their identity, which is really important. And they're not going to engage with somebody that just dismisses a real important part of their identity, are they? So yeah, we've got some bits here about apologise, and I think that's really important. We should be, when we get things wrong, we should be apologising to the people that we're working with. And absolutely, if this is an area that you don't have confidence on, then let's seek some training and support to be able to build our knowledge and experiences. Yeah, absolutely. Take some reflection time, maybe discuss it in supervision. Great. And as said, discuss with them why they're not engaging and ask for that feedback. I think that's when I reflect upon some of my own practice and engagement. So our trust used to have a policy that if somebody missed 3 appointments, they would be discharged from services. And part of my job is working in a rehabilitation service in the community, and we really started to challenge that. We said we're working with people that have severe mental illnesses, have neurodiversity, and sometimes they don't remember an appointment, or there's lots of other reasons why somebody isn't engaging. If we just stop engaging with them because they've missed 3 appointments, that's not really understanding their unique situations. And what we should actually be doing is asking, why is the person not engaged? Is it that it's not at the right time of day for them? Is it that they don't want to come in to wherever it is that we are holding it? Is it that they can't actually get some transport to there? All of these sorts of questions needed to kind of come into play first, because we're actually just discriminating against somebody if we're removing them from being able to have occupational therapy just because they haven't engaged. We really need to be asking why. Real. So, Sav, do you want to move on to the last scenario? We've got plenty.
Yeah, I'm on that.
I thought I'll only put 3 scenarios in because we'll run out of time, but we're doing really well. So, scenario 3, and this is a personal scenario, and I don't mind sharing that this is one that I put in because it reflects my own lived experience. So, a dyslexic occupational therapist notices that meetings and emails are filled with unexplained acronyms, making it hard to follow discussion. This is mentally exhausting, exclusionary, and undermines confidence. They've tried to address this within team meetings and supervision, but others continue to write and say unexplained acronyms and roll their eyes when the occupational therapist repeats how difficult it is for them to follow and remember. They're made to feel incompetent, isolated, and different from others. So again, what would affirmation practice look like in this case? What laws and rights apply here? And what should this occupational therapist who is experiencing the discrimination do next? And what should the other people that continue to discriminate do next? So let's have a little bit of a look in the chat. Oh, I've lost the chat. There we go. Write information in full, absolutely. And I suppose this is a personal one to me, and it's something that I challenge on a daily basis. So I try my best not to use acronyms. So I will try and say, for example, Healthcare Professions Council rather than the HCPC. I'll try and say Royal College of Occupational Therapists rather than RCOT, or I'll say Continuing Professional Development rather than CPD. Because somebody with dyslexia, particularly when I hear acronyms being said out loud, my head goes, okay, I've just heard 3 letters there. I know they mean something. What does it mean? And my brain will be searching to find out what those 3 letters mean. And then by the time they've connected that, I've lost the flow of the conversation. So it's really important that we are thinking about the language that we're using and that we're being inclusive in what we're saying and how we're communicating it. I find acronyms saying out loud much harder than acronyms written down, because if I see an acronym written down, then I've got time to process that. But in verbal communication, I don't. And I think that's a really important point to make. So I'm just having a little bit of a look here. So we've got things like first time use acronym should always be included in meaning. I think that's a really important point. So most documents these days will write out the acronym the first time. But what I'm challenging is actually, is that discrimination? Because absolutely, it's much easier to say HCPC than Healthcare Professions Council. But for somebody whose brain doesn't work in that way, always saying what you mean all of the time is more inclusive. Let's have a little bit of a look. Just really fast. I hate it when people talk in acronyms. I end up a step behind. Yeah, absolutely. Sounds like an institutional issue. And I mean, I work in the National Health Service. It's an acronym in itself, isn't it? The NHS. And certainly, I think in lots of health care profession services, we really do use our own language sometimes. We'll reduce lots of things to acronyms or to shorthand, but that's not being inclusive to everybody that's joining the profession or the workforce, is it? And often is a barrier. And sometimes is a way of, well, we've got our own language that we understand, but you're not clever enough or not in the know, so we're not going to kind of include you in that. The trust that I work for recently had, they put out, every time they're redoing a policy, they put out a thing for us to all kind of give our feedback on. And about 6 months ago, they wanted to redo the list of approved acronyms that the trust could use. So I got together with, within our trust, we have some support networks for, there's one for LGBTQIA plus staff, there's one for staff who have neurodiversity, there's one for staff who have long-term health conditions, another staff for, another one for people who experience mental health problems, and for staff from Black and ethnic minority backgrounds. I got together mainly with the neurodiversity group, and we wrote a reply to basically say, actually, this policy in itself is discriminatory because you're creating a list of accepted acronyms that the trust could use. What if we pushed it further and said, let's not use acronyms, let's not use shorthand, let's always say what we mean? So we got a bit of a mixed reaction. We got some quite positive reaction, but then some people that really struggled with the fact that they needed to suddenly write out everything, particularly in their notes, so that it was easy for everybody to understand. Sorry, I'm going to have a look at the things again. So I used to feel like I didn't understand conversations because of the use of acronyms. I've started to ask directly, what does this mean? I initially felt uncomfortable and a bit silly, but I would get so many other people in the room saying, I didn't know what that meant either. Absolutely. This is my experience. Will always now ask. And I'm known for asking in my organisation. I remember in one OT job, it took a whole team to work out what STS meant. Absolutely. And for me, the acronym of OT itself means two different things, doesn't it? So you've got occupational therapy and then you've got occupational therapist, and they are two distinctly different things. And I remember few years ago that kind of being pointed out to me, and it being a bit of a light bulb moment of going, actually, yeah, if I use the term OT, what do people really, do they know that I'm talking either about the profession or about the governed therapy? So it's important. And somebody's asked what STS means. I have absolutely no idea. So I don't know, Sab, we've got about 5 minutes left. I don't know if we wanted to have a little bit more of reflection on what people thought of what's going to be in the guide so far. Do people think it'll be useful? Was there anything that they think we probably missed? And then do you want to say a little bit more about so the RCOT's community platform and where that is? Because it's slightly different from the website, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, thank you so much, Rachel. I think that was
Yeah.
really insightful and really thought provoking as well, the reflection. I think for me, what I'd like to add is not much really, because you've already covered a lot of it. Can you see me? I can't see myself for whatever reason.
Hang on, I'm going to close the chat and then no, I've just got, there you go. Oh
Yeah,
no, it's
that's
just the dots.
That's very strange. Yeah, I can only see the background, but I can't see myself. I have no idea how to bring myself to it. But I think, I think it's just to re-emphasize the point that you made about it being a living document. That when so this month, in October, we're going to publish the sort of like the working version of the guide on the communities platform. Then, like I said, we are exploring other different formats to come as well before the end of the year. But I think what would want to like is to emphasize is what you said earlier about this being a living document. So what we want is to populate this with as many examples and insights from yourselves, from everybody on this
Yeah.
call. So when you're practicing, when you're working, whatever you come across, please do get in touch if you think, oh, this will be good to include in the guide. So if you see an example that you think would be relevant and useful for other occupational therapists to know, please get in touch with us, and just let us know. Then we can keep improving it and adding to the guide.
Yeah, so there's a couple of comments, people asking where the communities platform is. So if you just go to the Royal College of OT's website, and on the front, when you log in on the front bit, it has like 3 things, and one of them is communities platform. If you click on that, you do need to, I think, because I did it when it first opened, kind of set up your own sort of portfolio in there. But there's lots of really good ways to engage with other members. So we really would recommend spending some time going and having a look at it and playing about with the different discussions and things that are there. And although we've got a link there too, where you can find the communities platform. And a couple of people have asked about the slides, Sav, so I don't know whether we could put those on the community platform as well. So
Yeah, I think so. I think we can find a way to share them. We
yeah,
can, we can explore, speak to, to the team after this session to think to explore different ways we
yeah,
can share the slides either on the platform or if we can email them to people. I don't know.
yeah,
But yeah, happy to look
yeah.
into that. Yeah.
And I'm Rich Booth Gardner on the platform, and on the platform you can send direct messages. I'm happy for anybody to kind of have a discussion or a thought.
Yeah, and also happy for anyone to reach out to myself or to Ketan Davé, who is also on the call, if you've got any questions. And and once you've seen the slide, once you've seen the guide when it comes out, if you think there's something that's missing that you think we should include, please do let us know.
Yeah, that's great. And somebody asked about recording, so I think this session's been recorded, isn't it? So
I think so. It's being recorded. Yeah, so it should be on the website as well. So you can always revisit if you want to refresh yourself.
fab.
I think that's it. So thank you everyone for joining us this afternoon. It's a work day in the afternoon, but I'm really pleased to see this many people join the session. And yeah, looking forward to the guides coming out and getting all those questions and interaction from all of you on how we can keep improving this and make make it better and make it really useful for yourselves. So thanks everyone.